Good evening, everyone. It's Rebecca with Red True Crime, and thank you again for stopping by for the newest edition, new subcategory of videos I'll be doing called Crime of the Century. So, as you started this video, you should have seen a little screen pop up that gave a definition of what crime of the century is. So, for those of you who did not read that, let me tell you what that is. Crime of the century is an idiomatic phrase used to describe particularly sensational or notorious criminal cases. That's a lot of words. So basically, anything that has made the news that sticks around and everybody remembers it, that's basically a crime of the century. Examples would be like OJ, Simpson case, John Benet Ramsey, Alec Murdaugh. That was a little bit more recent. But those are examples of that. Even, oh gosh, the disgraced guy from Hollywood, Harvey Weinstein would be another one, would be a crime of the century. So that is what we'll be talking about in this series. So, what I've decided is for the first crime of the century I'm going to talk about, it's basically the case that got coined crime of the century for the very first time. And this is so complicated and so convoluted, and the details are crazy. So, I'm going to tell you right now, but this might be a long one because there's a lot going on with it. So go get you your coffee, your wine, your weed, whatever it is you use to relax, cookie, something like that. I've got a a brownie right here from Alex's Cheesecakes in Greensboro. Love that place. Um, so what I'm saying is get comfortable, sit back, relax, and get ready to listen because this could be a long one. So, all right. So we're going to start off with the fact that the child that went missing, it was Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. That is the child that went missing. He was 20 months old when he was taken. And his parents are Charles Lindbergh, the aviator, and Anne Murrow Lindbergh was his mom. So before we get too much into the actual case, let's talk about Charles Lindbergh Sr. here, because really it's important to know who he is so you have an idea how and why this case blew up like it did. So let me see. Let me get to his notes. Okay. So Charles Augustus Lindbergh Sr. is an American aviator and officer. Born February 4th, 1902 in Detroit, Michigan. Died August 26, 1974 in Kipolua, Hawaii. Now, here's why Charles Lindbergh is just a well-known person. He is the person who made the first non-stop transatlantic flight. He went from New York City to Paris. And it took him 33 and a half hours, and he went about 3,600 miles nonstop. He didn't sleep, he didn't eat, he just kept flying. And the plane that he took was the Spirit of St. Louis, so which is actually in the Smithsonian. And I've seen that, so it's kind of cool. So here's a little bit more about him. So his father was a congressman, Charles August Lindbergh. He was raised in Little Falls, Minnesota, and D.C. because his dad was, a congressman. He was in D.C. a lot. Joined the U.S. Army Air Cadet in 1924. Earned a second lieutenant in 1925. Worked for U.S. Air Mail in the greater St. Louis area. And around 1927, that is when he took his historic flight. And he actually received, President Coolidge awarded him the Flying Cross and the Medal of Honor because of that flight. And let's see, he also earned the highest French Order of Merit, the Legion of Honor. And he was promoted to the rank of colonel in the U.S. Army Air Corps Reserve. Now, because of this flight, commercial airfare or commercial aviation just kind of blew up. And they actually called this the Lindbergh boom. Because of him, everybody was like, well, maybe we all could travel transatlantic nonstop. This could be great. And getting goods back and forth faster. It just opened up the possibility for so much more. Time magazine had named him Man of the Year in 1928. Herbert Hoover appointed him to the National Advisory Committee to Aeronautics in 1929. Let's see, received a Congressional Gold Medal in 1930. In 1931, he and a French surgeon, Alexis Carrel, began on the first perfusion pump for heart surgeries and transplants. Wow. I mean, what didn't this guy do? Let's see. And then, there's other things involving Lindbergh, about laws that changed after this kidnapping, and we'll get into that as we get into the case. So let's get back to Charles Lindbergh Jr. So Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. was 20 months old at the time of his disappearance. Um, so he was taken at 9 p.m. on March 1st, 1932, from the nursery on the second floor of the house in Hopewell, New Jersey. Now, his nursery nurse did not know that he was missing until about an hour later, around 10 o'clock, when she went to check on him. Parents had just come home at that time, too, and she reported it to them, who then called the police, the local police there in New Jersey. And once they filed their report, it ended up being kicked up to the New Jersey State Police to investigate. Now, while they were looking for the child, uh, the nursery nurse, Betty Gow, Gow, she actually found the ransom note, and it was sitting on the windowsill. And in that ransom note, it demanded $50,000 in ransom. And I looked that up. Just to give you an idea of what $50,000 meant in 1932 in today's standards. So 50 grand in 1932 would be about $1,170,000 in 2024. And he just asked for this, like, no big deal. And here's the interesting thing is Charles Lindbergh could actually afford something like that. So, they hit him up the right way. Now, as they were investigating, they found there was mud on the floor of the nursery. There were footprints underneath the windowsill on the ground, but they were impossible to measure because of just the way the material, it was muddy. So there was just no way to get any good prints off of that, or a good measurement off of that. And the ladder that was used had two broken rungs on it. Now, they don't know if it was on the way up that it broke or if it was on the way down. So, but I believe it was on the way down, and I'll go into why I think that later on in this video. And as we're talking, you're going to see pictures pop up of different people and whatnot, and I'll explain who they are. So, oh goodness. So yeah, so the kidnapping scene, there was mud found on the floor, ladder was broken, and there was no blood or fingerprints anywhere that they could find. Now, in 1932, fingerprints were kind of relatively a new science. So I don't know if they weren't able to get them because of the lack of technology at that point. So I don't know. But they did talk to all the employees, friends of the family, questioned them, and even made an appeal. This is what got me when I read this. They made an appeal to the crime underworld to see if they could find out what happened to this child. And every clue and every lead they got, they exhausted it. I mean, they investigated, it was exhausted. Nothing ever really came out of that. So let's see what else we got here. And this is where it gets interesting with the ransom notes. And notice I said note. So we've already got one found on the day that the little boy went missing on March 1st. A second ransom note was found on March 6th, so 5 days later, 1932, sent from Brooklyn, and it demanded $70,000, which is about $1,470,000 today. And because of that second note, there was a police conference that was called for by the governor of New Jersey, and it was attended by prosecutors, cops, and other government representatives. And the whole point of it was to discuss, like, okay, what's going on with this case and what procedures should we be following to do this? Because, this is Charles Lindbergh's son. He is like the most important American we have right now. Because when he did that transatlantic flight, like, he was completely untouchable. He was America. He was the guy on the poster that said, "This, I'm an American. Look at me, be me." This is who he was. So they went over that, and then at the time, Lindbergh had his own attorney hire some private investigators to help look too. And it doesn't really say if they ever found anything. But as we keep going, so on March 8th, a third note is sent in, and it was received by Charles Lindbergh's attorney, who is a Colonel Henry Breckinridge. So the attorney received a note and informed on there that an intermediary hired by Lindbergh would not be accepted and required a code in the newspaper. So same day, a Dr. John F. Condon published in the Bronx Home News to be a go-between and basically pay off the kidnappers and contributed an additional $1,000 towards the ransom. So this is where things get weird. So they have an attorney that's helping, and then all of a sudden, this physician is like, "Hey, I want to help. I want to be an intermediary. I want to help get this kid found. I want to help with the exchange." Don't know why, but this guy felt the need to do this, but here he is. So the next day, a fourth note is received by Dr. Condon accepting his offer. Lemberg gave the doctor $70,000 to negotiate to get the baby back. And they started negotiating through the newspaper, but they were doing like coded messages. And Dr. Condon was going by the code name Jafsie, Jafsie. So on 8:30 p.m. on March 12th, so now we are 11 days past when Charles Lindbergh Jr. was taken. Doctor received an anonymous phone call. And then he got a fifth ransom note delivered by a Joseph Perrone, a cab driver, who got it from an unidentified stranger. Now, in this one, it stated that another note would be found beneath a stone at a vacant stand 100 feet from the outlying subway station. Now, when they went there, sixth note was found by Dr. Condon, was told to meet a man at the Woodlawn Cemetery near 233rd Street and Jerome Avenue. So this is where he's being told. So we're on six notes. Okay. Six notes. And then he went there and he met up with an unknown man and they discussed the payment of the ransom. And another advertisement was placed to pay the ransom. Now, at some point, a baby sleeping suit was sent to Dr. Condon as a token of identity, and a seventh note received by Condon on March 16th. So now we're 15 days since the child was taken. And the suit was identified by Charles Lindbergh saying, "Yes, this is my son's sleeping suit." Now we're on note number 8 on March 21st, 1932. So insisting on completing a compliance and advised kidnapping had been planned for a year. So they're saying, the kidnapper is saying, yes, we want to make sure we have everything going with the compliance on this. And just so you know, we've been planning this for a year. So it's not like we just made this up. So on March 29th, so now we're at 28 days, Betty Gow, the nurse, found an infant thumb guard worn at the time of the kidnapping near the entrance to the estate, which does not look good. Ninth note received the next day threatening to increase the ransom to $100,000, which would be about 100,000. I think was like $4 million or something like that. Crazy how they're just like, let's just add more money to this. And this note also refused to put a code in for the newspapers. A 10th note received by Dr. Condon on April 1st, 1932. So now we're at a month. Instructed to have money ready money ready in the following night, to which Condon replaced or replied by an ad in the newspaper. 11th note was delivered on April 2nd, 1932, by a taxi driver who received a note from an unknown man. Note was found under a stone in front of a greenhouse at 3225 East Tremont Avenue in Bronx, New York. 12th note, received on the same day with reduced demand of $50,000. So why on earth would you go from 50 to 70 to 100 and then back down to 50? That doesn't make any sense. So so he received the note and this amount handed to a stranger in exchange of the 13th note. 13th note gave instruction on where the child could be found. Said baby was on a boat called the Nelly near Martha's Vineyard. Following day, an unsuccessful search happened. Search was repeated. Didn't find the child. So 13 notes, $50,000 goes out. You get a baby pajama set that you know is yours. You find an infant thumb guard by the estate, by the entrance to the estate. So at least that tells you which direction they went out when they took him. And they give you a location where to find him. You go, he's not there. So all of this, and let's see, this was basically a month into this whole entire problem. And then May 12th, 1932, the body of kidnapped child found, partially buried, badly decomposed, 4.5 miles away from the Lindbergh estate, which is very sad. So you're talking, if he went missing March 1st, and now this is May 12th, that's more than 2 months, almost 2.5 months. So the body was discovered by a William Allen, and he was an assistant on a truck being driven by Orville Wilson. Now, according to the medical examiner, the child's head was crushed, hole in the skull, and some parts were missing. So, I mean, it wasn't buried all the way. I'm sure animals scavenged, and that was part of it. And then the body was positively identified and cremated at Trenton, New Jersey on May 13th, 1932. So they really took care of that quick. Per coroner, child was dead about 2 months and death was blunt force trauma. So this is where the broken rungs on the ladder come into play for me. Because they're saying he's been dead for about 2 months, which means he most likely died the night he was taken. And if it was 20, I was almost 2 years old. The child was almost 2 years old. So he probably weighed about 30 pounds, and you've got a guy coming down a rickety ladder, rung breaks, drop child maybe land on head. That's probably what happened. It was probably a pure accident. I don't think this child died in malice. I think it was an accident, which is why I'm thinking those rungs broke on the way down because there was more weight for them to hold between an adult man and a child. So very sad. The whole situation was sad. Oh, the FBI, per J. Edgar Hoover, involved on March 2nd, 1932, and they said they wanted to act in an auxiliary capacity, meaning they didn't want to step on toes with the police, but the police were instructed to ask them for help or guidance as they went along. But on May 23rd, 1932, the FBI told New York City banks about ransom. So the ransom was paid in gold certificates. So they're notifying all the banks and everything around, like, hey, you get any gold certificates, let us know because, we just had this ransom go out. We need to track this money down. But on May 26, 1932, the New Jersey State Police offered a $25,000 reward for information resulting in the apprehension and conviction of kidnapper or kidnappers in the Charles Lindbergh Jr. case. June 10th, 1932, Violet Sharp, a waitress in the home of Mrs. Lindbergh's mother, so Anne Morrow Lindbergh's mother. This woman, for whatever reason, was under investigation by the authorities, and she committed suicide when she was about to be questioned on this case. She took poison, but she was cleared and had no involvement. So I don't know if this person was just a nervous person and the stress that she could be involved pushed her over the edge. I don't know, but I think that's a bit of a overreaction to kill yourself because cops want to talk to you. It's weird. But in September 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt requested all work be done by the Department of Justice. So now we're about, mm, let's see, he went missing in March of 1932. So we're already like a year and a half past when the child was found. And now we're got a new president. So this guy has had a relationship with Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, and now we got Franklin Roosevelt. So, but again, at this point, the banks are being instructed to keep an eye out for these gold certificates. And so they started following the money. That led them to Bruno Richard Hauptmann from Bronx, New York. So when they started tracking down this money and they found out who it came from, he was spending the money. They sat on this person's house and they just surveilled him as much as they could. And the house surveilled, and Hauptmann matched a description of John. So the guy that kept meeting up with the Dr. Condon as he gave him the name of John. He matched the description of what Dr. Condon had given. So there's that. Um, he also was a German carpenter. So Bruno Richard Hoffman is actually from Sac City, Germany, and that they found so much stuff at his house. He was a carpenter, and he only been in the U.S. for the last 11 years, so he was an immigrant. They found $20 gold ransom bill on his person. They also found $13,000 of the ransom money in his house, stuffed in a gas can. The car he had was also seen by the Lindbergh home days before the disappearance. And his handwriting, they took samples of his handwriting and it matched all the ransom notes. Or not so much matched, but it was within a reason, there was no reason to not believe that he didn't write. And when they started looking into his background in Germany, they found that he had a record of robbery and he had done some prison time. And he also arrived in the United States illegally in 1923, but that's, whatever. So eventually, he gets indicted for extortion September 26, 1934. And on October 8th, 1934, he was indicted for murder. Trial begins for him January 17th, 1935. And it lasted 5 weeks. Case was predominantly circumstantial. But here's what they had. The ladder matched the tool marks, how the ladder was made. There was tool marks on it. They had tools that made those grooves, so that matched up. The wood matched that was used for the ladder out of the attic, wood in the attic. And let's see what else. He also had Condon's address and phone number written down in his house. So, circumstantial, but a little bit more pointed. So after the trial and everything was presented, jury found him guilty on February 13th, 1935. Found him guilty of murder in the first degree, and he was sentenced to death. Defense appealed. October 9th, 1935, New Jersey court upheld the verdict because, they appealed it. Appeal denied on December 9th, 1935. And then he was scheduled to be executed on January 17th, 1936, but he got a 30-day reprieve. And, for people to argue the case. And then he was resentenced and scheduled for electrocution on March 30th, 1936, which means he actually got it, but he actually got executed on April 3rd, 1936 via electrocution. So that is the story of Bruno Hauptmann. So let's get back into Charles Lindbergh Sr. So Charles Lindbergh was a bit of a narcissist. if I'm gonna be honest, you know? And he was all about isolationism. Like he didn't think the US needed to be involved in other countries with battles. And he was a bit anti-Semitic, you know. But smart guy he was. Smart guy he was. Now, because of the Lindbergh kidnapping, that actually prompted Congress to establish kidnapping as a federal crime. Like that had not been established before this point. And because of the notoriety of the case, the Lindbergh family went into exile. They went to Europe for several years. But Lindbergh had uh, he didn't like to be involved. He was all about non-intervention with other countries. And his stance was, perceived as him being a bit anti-Semitic, even partially a Nazi sympathizer, because he never supported them publicly, and he would condemn them in his diary, but because he was anti-Semitic, that kind of added to the whole. He was a Nazi sympathizer. He was opposed to military intervention in Britain, but supported isolationist America. He resigned from the Army Air Corps after public rebuking from Franklin Roosevelt from his views. So he left. He left the Army Air Corps because of Roosevelt. But after Pearl Harbor, he supported the war effort but was rejected for active duty. He wanted to go back in at the rank he was at when he left, and Roosevelt was not having it. He's like, no, you're not getting that. So he went ahead and he still flew 50 combat missions in the Pacific Theater as a civilian consultant, which I did not know that even could even happen. And he was credited with shooting down an enemy aircraft. In 1954, President Eisenhower restored his commission and promoted him to brigadier general in the U.S. Air Force Reserve. He became an author, won a Pulitzer, and he died of lymphoma at the age of 72. Now, he had 13 children, 7 with his wife, Anne, and they never divorced. But when they lived in Europe, he had some affairs with some other women in Germany, and he had 6 more kids between 3 other women. And this is one thing where I really think he's just not a great guy. I mean, him not wanting to help other people is kind of crappy, but this crap with the extra kids, this is insane. So his other children, the children by the mistresses, had no idea who he actually was. I mean, that was dad, and they didn't see him but maybe a couple times a year, but they did not know his name. Like the girlfriends were told they had to keep this quiet, they had to keep everything simple. So he went by an alias. It wasn't until long after he died that they found out who he was. And he was a con man, man. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. Yeah, it was 2003 before they actually knew who it was that who their dad was, because they didn't realize it was the Charles Lindbergh. So let's get into the motive for the kidnapping. This is the other thing that was complicated. Because all my research, I didn't really see where they said there was a motive. So the true motive for why Bruno Hauptmann did what he did was never actually ever found out. But there were theories. One was that it was just simply about money. He wanted the 50 grand. He'd already been convicted of robbery in Germany, so he wanted money. That's one part of it. The other, obsession. The kidnapper, Bruno Hoffman, was obsessed with Lindbergh. They said they found scrapbooks in his home with all of Lindbergh's information and stuff. So the guy was obsessed. The one that gets me the most is the inside job, and I had heard this before I started researching this. Some people believe that Lindbergh arranged the kidnapping to cover up placing his son in a medical facility. And I read up on that, and the little boy had some type of rickets-like illness, something with his that affected his bone growth. And there's also a judge from California who wrote a book, and her opinion is that Lindbergh sacrificed his son for a scientific experiment. I don't know. I do truly believe that when the child was taken and the fact that he died, I don't believe that was the intent. I think it was simply an accident the child was killed. And I really believe that he would have been, once the ransom was paid, he would have been returned unhurt. But unfortunately, that did not happen. But that is right there the recap for the crime of the century, the first one that was coined that, and that was in 1932. Charles Lindbergh stood for so many things. America was like the big one, aviation, America, the American dream. One other thing about him, though, and this is the other reason why people thought he was a Nazi sympathizer, he was big on eugenics. And for those of you who don't know what that is, eugenics is really about the best people, the best genetics, the the best look, the best whatever. Because the Nazis were all about the Aryan race, the blonde hair, the blue eyes, and he was also of that ilk, but it was more about strong genes. So a lot of people really thought that he was a Nazi sympathizer because he had that opinion, which I think is nuts. I don't think you can really plan stuff like that, but it is what it is. So, but yeah, that is the story of Charles Lindbergh. And I'm sure there's more to him than meets the eye. I'm sure, we could find something where you'd have even more questions about his culpability in his son's death. But he still has children, he has grandchildren and great grandchildren that went into the aviation world. So his legacy is strong, very strong. Wow, I thought this whole thing would take longer than what it did. But that, my dears, is one for the books. So again, thank you again. This is Rebecca with Red True Crime. Um, you can go to my YouTube channel, Red True Crime. I have a Facebook page. I have a website. I have Instagram. I have TikTok. I have it all. So please subscribe, like, share, comment, criticize, whatever, whatever you'd like to do. If you have any other ideas about what could be another crime of the century that you would like me to cover, let me know. But have a great night, great weekend, be safe. And as I always say, be weird, be rude, be safe, because if you're weird and rude, they will not take you. I truly believe that. So have a wonderful night. Thank you again for listening, and I'm out.